What can the dead tell us? For trailblazing FBI profiler Jana Monroe, the answer is everything. As one of the first women in the FBI's elite behavioral science unit, Jana spent her career uncovering secrets from the shadows, listening to what victims couldn't say, and learning what killers tried to hide. She interviewed some of the most notorious serial killers in history and helped bring justice where others saw only leads. In this episode of Making Maverick Moves, we go beyond the headlines and into the heart of the hunt with a woman who didn't just break barriers, she stared into the darkest parts of humanity and didn't blink. My name is Gina L. Osborn, and I'm an Army veteran. I spent 6 years during the end of the Cold War as a counterintelligence agent. I was appointed as an FBI agent, and during my 22-year career, worked everything from Asian organized crime to terrorism. I became the Assistant Special Agent in charge of cyber and computer forensics. And then I came out of retirement and spent 2 years as the Safety and Security Officer at LA Metro. Now I'm here to help you make your Maverick move. Hey, welcome to the show, Jana.
Oh, thank you, Gina. It's my pleasure to be here.
Jana, before we begin, I would like to thank you. Thank you because as my role model and a woman who came before me in the FBI and in law enforcement, for all of us who came behind you, we want to thank you for all you did to make it easier for us when we came through.
Oh, thank you. And I know it wasn't easy for you. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show because of all of the amazing things that you have done. But the big thing, and you have a beautiful book called Hearts of Darkness that we're going to talk about in a little while, is that you were one of the first women in the FBI's behavioral science unit. Back then, what was that like?
Well, when you say back then, you have to, picture the 1990s, right? And there was no welcome wagon at all. However, I mentioned the decade that it was because things were very different then. And I think if you put the social acceptance and the norms on it now, looking back, I don't want to use the word, like horrified. That's a little theatrical, but people would be surprised at the things that were okay to say to women. It was just, you had two choices, take it or leave it. So although nobody was mean to me or bad or anything like that, it'd be, I got a t-shirt that said, speak slowly. I'm a natural blonde. That's when blonde jokes were out. So for me, there was a real sense of needing to prove myself.
Right. And what was it like back then in that unit? Because you went after serial killers.
Right. Yeah. That was it. It was, when I say prove myself, and I think we all have in the male dominated career, you're going to have those challenges. And I actually was in 9 different offices throughout my career. And every time it was starting over with that one perspective, no matter what rank I held, you had to start over to prove yourself. But I think if you look at the behavioral science unit, I felt we had an 18-month training, but I felt very prepared to be in the unit in the first place because I volunteered for so many things. I went to medical examiner things. I went to some autopsies. I did ride-alongs with police. I'd been a police officer, so I had worked some homicide cases. So I took that aggregate of experience with the training in the unit, and I felt very prepared to be a part of it.
And you worked with John Douglas, and he is renowned for being part of that. So when you got there, how did they treat you? And what was it like? I mean, I know that you had experience in law enforcement before working with dead bodies, but what about the serial killer business? I mean, that had to have been really exciting.
Yes, it was. And John Douglas is he's a great guy, and I learned a lot from him. He was my unit chief. The funny part about this, and I do mention it in the book, so I was being treated, I would say, during the interview process for it, like with kid gloves. And I know my male counterparts who had applied or gone before me had not gone through this, but what they did, it was John Douglas and another agent were interviewing me for the position, and they asked, your basic questions. What do you bring to the table? What's your experience? Why do you want to do this? Then he pushes these 5 pictures, 8 by 10 pictures across his desk to me, and they're grisly, bloody crime scenes. But he didn't ask me any questions. He just looked at me. So finally, after what seemed like 10 minutes, probably 15 seconds, I said, well, what do you want? What do you want me to do? And he says, I'm observing you. And I said, well, I know you're making me a little nervous. It's kind of, creepy. He said, well, I want to see if you're going to, like faint or gasp or, pass out or something. And I said, well, why would I do that? And he said, well, we had a couple of other females that tried and they said they couldn't do this type of work. And so I wanted to make sure you could. I said, well, and I told him my background again. I said, I had been a homicide detective. So why would looking at pictures make me behave that way? And I said, plus, I did a little background on a search on you long before the internet. And I said, you were a tennis instructor in the military before becoming an agent. So why would you be more qualified than I am? So when you ask how was he, I do not recommend that at all for an interviewing technique. But to his credit, he hired me anyway.
That is fantastic. Well, after everything you have been through, you said that you had to prove yourself every time you got to a new office. Was there ever a time where you felt that, you know what, I belong?
Yeah, I did. I felt that quite a few times, but again, each time that was not the initial feeling. It was that meeting all my male counterparts, even as a special agent in charge. When I was like in the Phoenix office, all of my counterparts, when you do the meet and greet, so the marshal, the sheriff, the United States attorney, the tribal, there it was the tribal police, DEA, Secret Service, all of those were men. So again, it's not like you want to wear your resume on your sleeve, but there is always that, unconscious bias or the blink, and they make a snap judgment. And I felt that. But I think as I progressed in my career, the time became shorter, and it was typically something to do with a case or something that was going on, and I could jump right in and show them that I knew where that was going and what I was doing.
Right. And it's funny in your book that something that resonated so much with me, you talked about being the quick draw because whenever there was a task where the men in our organization felt that it would be better for a woman to handle that, whether it was, if children were involved, or I remember in my situation, whenever I was working human smuggling, I would always be in charge of the women to take them to the bathroom. So that was my primary responsibility a lot of the time when I was out on these searches. So, but yeah, you termed it quick draw.
Yes, I had bathroom duty with some, but somewhere where there was like child protective services involved, or there were the children, there was nowhere for them to be at the time. I was, without being the volunteer, I was the volunteer. And like you say, quick draw, quick, go take the kids and draw, go take them over here. Do you have any Play-Doh? And I remember being asked once, they said, well, you don't like have any toys in your briefcase? And they were being serious, or in your purse or something. I'm like, no, that's not a standard issue for the FBI agents. But it was just kind of an expectation, the only female there, and that you would be the nurturer and take care of the children or the tasks that were not as important.
I remember that. I remember that so much. Well, when you were in the Tampa office, you worked on the Oba Chandler case, and that was probably, one of the most horrific murders because it was Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters. They were tourists there, and he murdered all 3 of them. So you talk about in your book on how you had that case almost from start to finish because in the behavioral science unit you worked on a lot of cases in parts of those cases. But tell us about that Oba Chandler case and how that still it sticks with you.
Well, you're right. And when we were in the behavioral science unit, rarely did you work a case from beginning to finish. You just worked interview techniques, interrogations, crime scene analysis, those types of things, just one piece of it. Well, this one, I was what they call the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime coordinator. That's a mouthful. So I worked with the behavioral science unit with all of the local agencies in Tampa. So if they had a case they felt was appropriate for the behavioral science unit to look at, I was their coordinator and I would box up all of the evidence and materials required and send it to them. So I did get to know all of the guys in the unit at the time. This case, as you mentioned, Joan Rogers and her two daughters, Michelle and Christy, were out of Ohio for the first time in their lives. They lived on a farm. It was one of the daughters' high school graduation. They wanted to go to Florida. I'll fast forward to how do they get to Tampa. They wanted to go and be out on the ocean and go to Tampa Bay. And they ended up accepting a boat ride with a stranger who had befriended them at the hotel. And then, unfortunately, very unfortunately and horrifically, he killed all three and had bound their hands and put 55-pound cinder blocks on them to weight them down. He threw them out of his boat. Very, very, very tragic. Tragic anywhere, but when you look at Tampa, so much of the area in Florida is tourism, and it really, really cut into the tourism business. People did not feel safe going there. So I was there when the bodies were dug out of the water, which was horrific enough. And St. Petersburg Police Department had the jurisdiction. They worked on the case. Fast forward, I get transferred to Quantico, and we have regions that we worked, and I had that region. So after about 16 months, the case went cold. So they came to Quantico for help. So there were a group of us looking at the evidence, took it all out. I mean, just like, what did we miss? As you know well, Gina, everything's in the details. Little details matter. And so there was a little handwritten note that was in there. And I said, well, who wrote that? And they said, well, Joan Rogers, the mother. I said, well, how do you know that? Silence. No, nobody knew that. That was an assumption. So one of the detectives, I think two of them, went to Ohio and showed her husband the handwriting, and he said, that's not my wife or my daughters. So what I suggested was to blow up the handwriting. Again, now you'd put it on the internet, you'd do all kinds of things. Not available then. But all of the business owners in Dale Mabry, which is a huge street in Tampa, offered to pay for billboards. So we put the handwriting up in the billboards, and less than 48 hours, we had quite a few calls, and three of them were all for the same name, Oba Chandler.
Wow. So that's how he was caught.
Right. And the reason you'd say, well, how come people are familiar with his handwriting? Well, it's because apparently he put on aluminum siding and the screened in porches in Tampa, which you really need or you get eaten up alive by bugs. And apparently he did a shoddy job at doing that. And he was in small claims court with quite a few people and not too terribly bright person. He prolifically would write back nasty notes to the people about why he was not going to pay for them. So they were very familiar with his handwriting.
Wow, that is an incredible case. So how does that still stay with you?
Well, it still stays with me to this day because I did see it from beginning to end. And because, like so many of the victims, innocent people doing nothing to warrant this. Not that people deserve to be killed, but high risk victims. And let's take a look at prostitutes or people that hang around with a drug cartel or something. They're putting themselves in a really high risk environment. That was not the case with a mother and two daughters who lived on a small farm in Ohio and went on their first vacation. And to have them so brutally murdered, and for me to have seen not only in person, but their pictures over and over again, it really kind of etched its way into my mind and my heart.
Had he done that before?
Yes. In fact, he received the death penalty. He's no longer with us. But yes, he had not that exact thing, but he had killed before. And then the police were able to uncover where two women from Canada had visited that area and had come into contact with him. And he wanted to take them. One of the women went on the boat with him. The other one declined. And he then he articulated to her what he wanted to do to her, which was he was going to tie her up, put cinder blocks around her, rape her, and throw her in the water.
So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and she had reported that, but not in that much of a detail. So when she was contacted later, it was almost eerie that she articulated what he said to her. Obviously, we don't know if he said that to them because they were deceased, but it sure sounded like that was a fantasy that he replayed.
Wow. Well, every time I meet someone and they want to go into the FBI, they always say that I would say 9 out of 10 times, everybody has their own fantasy about going and working in the behavioral science unit, now known as the behavioral analysis
Right.
unit, right?
Yes.
So tell us, what was a day in the life of Jana Monroe whenever you would go out and say, have to interview a serial killer one day?
Oh, so the interviews with serial killers, I don't, the word fun never really entered into it, but that they were the most challenging and rewarding because our work at that time, what we were doing, and let's just say a serial killer, right? They've already been convicted. So we could not offer them a stay of execution, a better meal, a transfer of prison. And so that's a real challenge. So why would they want to talk to us, right? Why are they going to tell us anything? We already know the details of the crime. We want to hear it from them. And what I wanted to hear, and unfortunately, I don't think anybody has those answers, the why. And we people that don't do those things and aren't inclined to aberrant behavior are always trying to attach our our characteristics and our ethics on them. And it's I learned that you can't do that. To me, my definition, they're true evil. But the way I would approach an interview, of course, I knew the case inside and out. But like we were taught, and we did this usually in pairs, we would go in pairs, was to just defer to their ego, right? One of two things. Just say, you were so smart. You got away with so many things. You evaded police detection. How did you do that? We want to learn from you. We want to learn from you. Because one of the things was so many that did turn themselves in, or once they were apprehended, they'd say, you guys are so stupid. So it's like, yes, yes, we are. Help us, and that. Or the other, sometimes they would feign, because most of them were sociopaths, but they would feign having some kind of remorse. And so the approach would be, I'm sure you don't want others to follow in your footsteps or do what you have done. So help us understand that better so that we can come up with some kind of a, help or treatment plan for people who are so inclined.
So it sounds like you're going after their ego.
Correct. And there was no shortage of that. It was amazing.
But I find that to be a fascinating trait of a serial killer. It's
Right.
the ego and thinking that they know more than everybody else, and they're going to get away with it, I would imagine.
Right, and that's the thing again, we mortals, we people that just can't even imagine committing something so horrific if you don't have if you're not remorseful, right? Some of them were sad because they got caught, not because of what they'd done. They'd been found out. That was it. So they did seem to have, because they got away with so much, and so many of them would put some calculation into the front end of it, like Ted Bundy being the most prolific with the thought, the premeditation that he had for that was amazing. But so because they'd gone through all that, their assumption was that other people didn't focus on things like that and didn't understand how much work it was to commit or accomplish a crime like that and not be apprehended.
So, of all those serial killers, and I think in your book, you say you've interviewed over 850 people
Well,
while you're
no, I didn't interview over 850 people. I worked on over 850 cases, and
okay.
yeah, and some of those were, for interview techniques. Some of them were for crime scene analysis, link analysis, but that wasn't interviews in total. No.
So what did you learn from them? I mean, are there any lessons that you could share with us, whether it be leadership lessons or human, traits anything that you could share that is an interesting lesson that you've learned from talking to these people?
Yes, and I put that in my book also because it struck me. I left the unit. Most of my male colleagues stayed until the end of their career, and then they were able to take that skill set that they had and turn it into other things post career. I decided to leave and try going into FBI leadership, executive leadership. One of the reasons was because looking at bloody, battered bodies all the time and seeing that always the ugliness. I found being introspective that it was definitely changing the way I looked at people and my outlook. And I didn't like that. My husband helped bring that to my attention also. And I thought, okay, I'm an upbeat person and I wasn't at that time. So I took the evil and I put that in there because I've seen the evil of the few I learned to recognize the good of the many.
Hmm.
And I think that helped me so much with, I am a people person and I really wasn't for that period of time. And it helped me get that equilibrium back and actually be more understanding of people as a whole. We all are flawed. We all have things we need to work on, but overall, we're good people.
Hmm. That's a great lesson. When you would go in and talk to these people, how much of it would be science or research, and how much of it would be your instincts, trying to see whether or not they're telling you the truth or uncover what really happened?
That is a great question. And to me, you can call it all kinds of things. Your little inner voice, your intuition, whatever that the little hairs on the back of your neck that stick up, that other communication that we have inside. The training that I had and the situational awareness helped me hone in on that. But that is something that everybody has. And I would find myself a lot of times talking with somebody and I'd get like a little shudder or something, because again, like you and I would be talking about, oh, what kind of nail polish, or they would be using that same laissez-faire attitude and tone about decapitating someone or eviscerating someone. So you'd have to, listen to the words, but the body language, tone, everything did not match what they were talking about.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I paid attention to the things that made my skin crawl.
Mm.
And that's certainly not science.
Sure.
So yeah, so it was that balance of the two, but I think I had that reaction and used it more in my follow-up questions than
Hmm.
I did with my training.
Interesting. Do you think people are born that way, or are they made?
The serial killers,
Hmm.
ah, you're asking that billion-dollar question. And I spoke with John Douglas not too long ago, and it was funny. We had the same answer. It's both. It
Hmm.
really is a combination of things. And you can do that. I won't bore you with all the research. And, statistics can you can edit them to kind of say what you want or lean to whatever you want. But you can see family members born in the same family, same parents, same household, neighborhood. One's a serial killer or, completely criminally oriented, and the other three or four aren't. And they've
Hmm.
got all the same things. So that's a study in itself when you've got all of those same things together. And that tends to be more towards the nature instead of the nurture. But you can see just the opposite too. So I really think it's a balance. And I don't think I'm going to live long enough for somebody to conclusively go, aha, we have the answer now. Even AI, I don't think AI is going to be able to resolve it in the next couple of years.
Yeah, talk about that. Do you think that people in your position now are going to be replaced with AI?
Um, I think I just went to a conference, so I'm dangerous. I went to a conference in DC 3 weeks ago about this and all of the capabilities, the possibilities. So I don't think they're going to be replaced. And I don't think there's going to ever be it's not going to be like, some of the sci-fi movies, the Terminator or something where the machines take over. But I do think there's the capability of that, and in areas where it's going to be a positive thing. I think law enforcement and some security, there's going to be some real uses for that. But it's going to have to, in my opinion, going to have some human oversight with judgment.
Oh, sure, for sure. Well, when you look back, and it wasn't that long ago where you and I were young new agents, right?
Was
And
I
the
young once, Gina?
Yes, you were. You still are, my dear. You still are. But I mean, I remember in the span of my career when we would do a wiretap. We would use cassette tapes, and we would have to make 3 copies of the tape, and we would have to do this and do that, and then fast forward 10 years, and my cyber team would do one, and they would have everything on one tiny little chip, and they'd be ready to go to discovery the day that the case came down. So, I mean, I think there's just so much that has changed from the time where we started and then now. But 5 years from now, how is it going to work, and how much easier will it be for people in law enforcement to do their jobs?
Well, how much easier and how much harder, as you know, the good and the evil of everything. So you
Hmm.
put this technology with bright people who are on the wrong side of the law, and it's going to be, there's just so many possibilities just from the voice thing, doing the scam calls. You've got the Hume bots that I think they're going to continue to make those look more and more human. There's going to be people that are deceived by those. But at the same point, you put that technology for the use of good, it's just going to be amazing. I think there's things that we probably haven't even thought of yet because we're not, on the cutting edge of that. But I think it's exciting, but I'm cautiously excited about it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, you went on to rise to the top, nearly to the top of the FBI. I remember you in Los Angeles after 9/11, and then you wound up going to be the assistant director in charge of the cyber division when it was brand new. So, and then you went on to corporate life where you held, very high jobs. So, all of this experience that you've had, your law enforcement experience, being in the behavioral science unit, all of that, what did you take with you when you left the Bureau? And do you still use any of it now?
Yes. And I think that's one of the things I love about having new challenges and different assignments. You learn something, even if you're not in learning mode, you learn something, good or bad, you learn it. And there are takeaways that you can then apply to your next position. And
Mm-hmm.
I think initially, and I spoke to you about this because I know you had a great career in the military and then in law enforcement, and me, law enforcement and law enforcement. And then I went into corporate, and it was literally like landing on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many differences in that. But once I got the hang of it, understood, and really immersed myself in the culture, there were many things from a leadership standpoint, from building teams, from understanding what the bottom line for the company is, right? But how to get your team and everybody moving in that same direction. All of those were things that I learned in each one of the positions I had previously, or
So,
takeaways.
yeah. So this show, Making Maverick Moves, I know in your career, just being such a trailblazer that you were, even I was amiss when we were talking about your early career on how you helped Jodie Foster prepare for her role in Silence of the Lambs because you were the only woman there to mentor her.
Right. And she was great, extremely professional. And of course she knew all of her lines and everything for the film. And they filmed quite a bit of it at Quantico because they wanted that piece of it as a new agents class to be as genuine as possible. But she and I sat in my office and she would bring up parts of the script and say, would you say that, or would a real agent say something like that? And I'd either go, yes, or no, no. Of course, I had no influence. She did with the script writers. So, she introduced things that she wanted to, because to me, it's again, the little details, it's the nuanced things. If you can make something as realistic as possible and still not lose that entertainment value, why not?
Sure, sure. Well, as where I was going with the making Maverick moves, is there a Maverick move that you've made that you can tell us about that really sort of changed your leadership style?
Um, I actually have several, but I won't bore you with that. One that comes to mind, because I think it was one of the boldest decisions I had, was hanging up on the acting FBI director twice.
Oh
And it
boy.
was during an active shootout with FBI agents and a case called the Texas Seven, which was seven escaped convicts that had killed some prison guards and a police officer escaping. And we had our SWAT team there. And this was an emergency operation center that we just set up, right there on the scene. And before we could get it set up, I was the only one there, and shots were fired. Well, you know how news travels. I have no idea who, within a few minutes, Washington, D.C. knew about it. And the director called me. I hear another shot. And I said, have to go. And I hung up on him. Well, he called right back and goes, don't you dare hang up on me again. And a brand new agent that I didn't even know his name, but he came along and I said, here. And anyway, I said, well, sir, sorry, I have to hang up. So I hung up again. Then he called back and I didn't even want to hear what he was going to say. And so I just gave it to the new agent and said, here, talk to Tom Picard, that he was the acting. And Tom, great guy, but Tom was I'm going to generalize here, a real New Yorker, right? And he, kind of dropped some words and whatnot. So I could even hear that what he was saying to the new agent. But I mean, a lot of people might think, well, of course, that's the right thing to do, right? Because lives were at stake and I was in charge of this and I didn't know what was going on. But there were a lot of people, as you know, in a very strict command and control environment that people would have chosen to defer, I think, to the higher authority rather than defy the protocols, which
Mm-hmm.
seems odd to people that aren't in one of those times. But I just thought, you know what? I would rather be fired. than have something go on that I wasn't paying attention to because I'm trying to brief him on something that, So anyway, I just told him that I thought it was inappropriate that he called.
in the middle of your shootout.
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know if
Wow.
you'd really call that a maverick move, but I just remember the adrenaline pumping, and I'm thinking, why is this man bothering me? And then I realized, he is the head of the whole FBI. Maybe you should show some deference. But
But that's what I love about you and what I admire about you is because every experience that I have had with you, and you and I didn't really know each other that well when you were the special agent in charge in Los Angeles, but we met. There was something had happened right after 9/11, and you had to come down to the Santa Ana RA to address the situation. And I just remember how confident you were, how in control, and how in charge that that you were of that situation. And where do you get that confidence? Because there's a lot of people who are listening who sometimes struggle with having confidence, but you just make it seem so effortless. So what is your secret to that?
well, thank you. I don't believe it's a secret, but I've always paid attention, right, when I'm in those kind of situations. And to me, I think I was blessed with a good um, right and wrong litmus. Okay. So if, to me, like in the situation you're talking to, we needed to let the agents had a grievance, right? And they wanted to talk. So I wanted to listen to them. That to me, that was the respectful thing to do. However, it wasn't going to be, not a counselor. So I didn't want it to get out of hand where somebody's, going, so-and-so's a bad person. It wasn't a gripe session. And that's how I preface that. If there are some legitimate complaints, I'm here to listen to them and I'll do all that I can to help change that. But so when someone would start going off the rails, like, no, let me bring it back. Remember what I said in the beginning. And I think by saying no to very few new opportunities and experience, I learned to gain that confidence. Because once you've been in a situation, you've got that muscle memory, and it's like, okay, this served me well last time. Let's do it, a similar way. No situation's the same, but follow that same path.
Right. And having to start over so many different times and so many
Right.
different places in the bureau. I think you probably have to get the hang of it. But I think we talk about when we're making a maverick move about how sometimes you're afraid to do something, and that maverick
Right.
move is doing it anyway. So I think you're a great role model for that because I'm sure there were many times in your career where being the only woman in the room or being the only person with your experience in the room that you had to take charge. And, whether you know it or not, you're going to take charge and make whatever needs to happen.
Right, absolutely. And I think you're correct. And there's a lot of our women that we know these same kind of things. You take something that maybe was a negative experience and you were mistreated, right? But it's like, okay, then my response is going to be such and such. And that can't come back to hurt me because so and so was in the wrong in the first place. I think I mentioned to you before, and this is very juvenile. When I was on inspection, which is like an audit in most corporations, you audit other offices. One of the inspectors, so I reported to him. He was known to be a very disagreeable person, right? So just not a happy person. Well, he didn't like something I'd written. I was in his office, and so he starts yelling at me, and then he took a book and threw it at me.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm like, "Are we six?" But I caught the book, and I'm like, "Okay." So he's still going off and doing this, and I thought, "Well, that's very inappropriate." So he turned around, and I threw the book back and hit him in the head.
Oh boy.
And which is not, again, I don't recommend that. But my point being there, what's he going to do? Go tell the assistant director? Well, I threw a book at her, and then she threw it back at me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I knew what he was doing was totally uncalled for, totally out of place. And I just thought, yeah, I'm just going to handle this right now, and then we'll put it to rest. And he and I got along well the rest of the time. We weren't buddies, but he never messed with me again. So
Wow. Sometimes you just have to stand your ground and whether they like it or not.
that's right. That's right.
That's great. Well, what's next for you, Jana? We're excited to hear.
Well, I'm going to follow your lead, I think. And well, this is exploratory at this point. I'm looking at potentially hosting a podcast in the true crime genre. I don't know if that's going to come to fruition, but I'm exploring that. I started a novel. And what my thought is on that, Gina, is pre-publication review for the FBI is arduous and necessary. And that is make sure you get the approval that you're not, giving away any trade secrets or doing so, which of course I wouldn't want to do anyway. But if you fictionalize the characters and use some of the cases that I was involved with, you can still get the story out and make people a little more entertaining without having to be concerned about, maybe giving away a real identity or something. So I started that, and then I'm continuing to do my public speaking on leadership and serial killers.
That is fantastic. So, is there anything that a leadership tip that you want to leave all of our listeners with?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I think the one that, and I mentioned this before, don't say no to opportunities that are going to be challenging and give you some more experience, even if they're a little bit out of your wheelhouse. I know I volunteered for a lot of things, and Gina, I know what a hard worker you are, but I know most women, I'll speak specifically about that, are in leadership or want to be, there's some hard work involved. But you can make that hard work fun by volunteering for things, learning something new. And we all learn from the negative too. So if something doesn't go real well, then it's like, aha, I'm not going to do that again. So I would just say get out there and do as much as you can in the realm of leadership and with other people, because you always learn invaluable lessons.
I think that's great. So many people are afraid to make mistakes, and
Yes.
I think people should make mistakes because that's the best way to learn.
Absolutely. When you talk about, one of the things that I'm looking at, when you look at 501c3s and all of these things where people are helping others, let's say Mothers Against Drunk Drive, you look at Susan Komen, it was breast cancer. They're all tragedies that have been motivated by somebody who is heartfelt at a loss or something. That's the same way with mistakes. When you look at that, it's such a learning thing, and we have an emotional response to that. It's not a good feeling. It's like, oh, if there's no such thing as everything being rosy. And if you sit in your armchair and don't take any risks, you're not going to learn anything. You're going to stay in your armchair. So
yeah.
I'd say don't let analysis paralysis prevent you from doing things.
That is great advice. Jana Monroe, thank you so much for being on the show. I am a huge fan, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Oh, Gina, thank you so much. It was truly my honor, and it's great being with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Making Maverick Moves with Gina L. Osborn is produced and edited by Zill Media. Connect with us on social media at ginalosborn.com/Making Maverick Moves. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Making Maverick Moves wherever you get your podcasts.